Okay, so welcome back to this part of the workshop. In this in this chapter, basically, we are going to I basically describe like my process like to sculpt the weapon for this character. That, as you can see, I've used like the 2D image plane under, so you can open it basically through the texture palette on the top bar of the interface, and you can just import your reference, and then using Shift Z you can control it. And so yeah, like here, as you can see, I started like to block out really the main proportions, and I'm trying to be very, very simple here in terms of like, I want to try to really catch like the first volumes of the weapon. So I'm subdividing the design into section, pretty much like, as you can see on the top part of the weapon, we have like, let's say, 4 main forms, let's say 3 main that you can see even in the alternate values of gray, and then there is like this part on the back near the trigger guard that basically has like the kind of a small display on the top with a kind of a glass type of material, or like a transparent or translucent material that it's a kind of a small display. So yeah, I'm trying to really using like a very simple primitive shapes here to really block out the main shapes. And you can approach this in multiple ways. You can even like work in Dynamesh and try to with like simple brushes, like a standard move brush, inflate or trim dynamic for hard surface. You can try to polish like one single tool, or you can split maybe like in just 2 or 3 sections. But I feel that when I work with like a design that is quite not extremely complex, but has like different shapes, and also like the silhouettes of each single component of the weapon is not that simple in terms of design, but there is a bit of like more a refined design process behind it. What I like to do is like to really subdivide it in pieces, so using like the classic divide tempera approach, because it really helps you like to simplify a more complex type of design. Like it's pretty much like the same principle that we use like for the entire character, the divide tempera, but I just thought to remind that you can pretty much use it for any design that you see that you'll struggle to use like just a few pieces. So yeah, like here after that I've had like these different pieces. What I'm using here, I like to use like the clip curve, that it allows you to get like those shapes right from different angles, so I'm keeping rotating, as you can see, the model from different views, from the top views, from the side views, and I'm kind of shaping every single tool, try to get like the shape that I needed underneath, basically. So as you can see here, also like I'm using like quite a lot the Z model brush as well, trying to experiment a bit, like to see what's the best output for each single part. So here I'm using a combination of bevels, insert edges, and yeah, like here I was trying. I mean, to do this operation that you see me kind of struggling a few times to try to get it right. There is actually, I think now, the knife brush that I'm not using it that much because it just came in the last in the last version or so of ZBrush. So most likely I could do that cut using the knife brush. That you can just hold like Control Shift, so it's in the same part of the interface when you open the panel of the selections or the masking. Or you could also use like a boolean, so I could just like create, let's say, a cylinder, extrude it, shrink it on one side, and then subtract that shape from the main part, and I was obtaining like that indent, so instead of using like a multiple time clip brush and Dynamesh. But as they say, the good thing of using ZBrush is also like, that you can do the same thing in like multiple ways. Like there are like always like 10 or 20 times or 20 different ways, like to approach the same problem. At the end of the day, just problem solving. So you can find the best approach that's the fastest or the most convenient for that particular solution. And here you can see me like basically adding like another simple shape. I think I use like the curve tube probably to just add like a kind of a stripe basically on like a circular type of clay on top of it, and then I move it, I extrude it a bit, and then I try to have like this kind of circular shape there that it's gonna basically be used as a light. So there are a few lights in the design of this character that I'm gonna try to finalize and to show off a bit better in the last chapter when I'm gonna basically render the model using Keyshot. And so like here I'm continuing like one thing that I'm gonna do sometimes, like in this case for example, I just add a filler there, and this is very important for 3D printing because I didn't describe it enough when I was also making like the other part of the character, like the legs, the arms, and the head. But sometimes in between different tools and different panels, what is very important for miniature especially is like that you have to make sure that there are not some sort of gaps in between different tools. Because when you're gonna do a print, sometimes there is gonna be a risk to, especially this for injection molding, there is gonna be a risk that when that basically the mold is gonna get stuck inside, so you're gonna have like a potential breakage at the end when basically you are removing the model from at the end, in the final production. So when you apply basically the mold on top of the model, if there is a cavity inside and basically the mold is able to go inside, when it's gonna solidify, and you're gonna break it to release basically the model, to unveil the model inside. The problem is like if there are cavities inside the different parts, the mold can get stuck, and when you are trying to remove it, it doesn't gonna basically open nicely, and then you're gonna pull it off, and everything is like amazing, clean, and no breakage and anything like that. But there is gonna be exactly the problem that maybe a piece is gonna get stuck there, and then when you are removing some parts, you're gonna really risk to compromise your model. So it's extremely important, especially if you are working, for example, for a company that then gonna decide to produce, I don't know, thousands of specific miniature that you are designing. If the miniature is designed for resin printing, sometimes it's easier, but also the miniatures that are for resin printing, if they're in a small batch, it's alright, but you can even, let's say, care a bit less about certain technical considerations like undercuts and things like that. But especially when you are working for companies that they gonna mass produce like the miniatures, they gonna pretty much ask you like that the final miniature needs to be a watertight mesh without like holes in between parts, or with certain panels that they have a specific thickness. So most of the time, for example, when you design like let's say a sword, or you are making even a weapon, the majority of the pieces that you are designing, they need to have a specific thickness based on the scale that you are working on. So for example, if you are designing a model that is let's say 32 millimeters, like in our case, what you have to make sure is like that pretty much let's say the blade of a sword, if you are designing a fantasy miniature, it's gonna be at least 1 millimeter in thickness, which is quite a lot. So when you're gonna see the actual miniature at the end, you're gonna think that, I mean, doesn't look so realistic, but I mean, it's alright, because I mean, you are designing a miniature and not like a game character. But it depends, you know, like sometimes you can design even miniatures that are slightly more realistic, and depending on the kind of final production that the company is going for, maybe they are going to print this miniature with a very high-end resin printer, and so you can go maybe slightly farther with the details, so you can go even a bit more thin and more realistic in the design. And that's basically what I'm trying to show you here. So I'm trying to be even probably a bit too, I'm adding even a bit more, like, let's say, slightly too much details maybe, but I think it's nice in terms of like challenge, first of all, because you can also in this way have a workflow that you can apply also for miniatures that are slightly more sophisticated or more more detailed, even for like, let's say, 75 millimeter or 50 millimeter, depending on what the company is gonna ask you to do. But I want also like to try to, let's say, push a bit the boundaries of what we can do with like 32 millimeters, because nowadays I've mentioned it already, like in a previous chapter, but nowadays there are also companies, I'm not gonna mention them, but there are companies and that are pretty much are printing like amazingly detailed miniatures that are quite realistic, so they don't have like that chunkiness and that feeling of every part is extremely heavy and thick, and doesn't looks like everything very let's say like a bit too bulky, let's say, you know. But you can actually try to go you know, with a slightly different approach and see, for example, you can try to design something that is a bit more realistic, and then eventually if you see that, for example, some parts are a bit too thin in production, or okay, you can adjust a few things, and you can do, I don't know, a test print in resin. Considering the very small scale, you don't want to lose so much resin either, so you can do a test print. If some stuff, you can, you know, do a test, a first prototype. If you see that there are some parts that they need to be increased in thickness, it's extremely easy in ZBrush to make adjustments like that, because, for example, you can use a transpose line, you can scale with a gizmo, you can use deformation to make an inflate of a full tool, a full mesh. If you have, I don't know, a part or a panel that is a bit too thin, you can use inflate on the deformation tool, or a contrast. So there are really multiple ways. You can extract, you can remesh and then redo the extraction, you can use panel loops. I mean, there are really a lot of ways that you can fix a mesh for 3D printing exclusively using ZBrush. So you don't have even to open other softwares like, I don't know, Mesh Labs or Mesh Mixer or Blender, or, I mean, not, or Netfab. I mean, there are some tools that are more they have some function that are more optimized to make, I don't know, hollowing of the model, like Mesh Mixer, or cleaning of some errors, like manifold edges, so you can use Netfab to remove like some errors before production if it's necessary. But for the 99% of your process, pretty much you can just like stick to ZBrush and do everything with that. There are just some functions that other programs are better designed, are better studied in terms of workflow to really optimize the model and make sure that like the mesh that you are exporting and you are sending for production, it's gonna be like extremely extremely optimized, so it doesn't gonna return any error, or there are, I don't know, holes in between some parts, or there are like some artifacts inside the mesh. So yeah, for this kind of things you can use like some other programs like that especially like a mesh mixer for hollowing, and I would say netfab to correct some errors. So these are pretty much the tools that I used to use, at least during my 3D printing experience, even when I was working in other projects in the past. So I always basically rely on this kind of projects. So that's my personal advice. And if you want to learn a bit more about all these steps, one tutorial that I strongly suggest is the tutorial of Martin Verhoeven, that is in the Gnomon workshop. Is another is an amazing artist that he created like also a very fantastic tutorial about like keying and basically optimizing like a 3D mesh and your 3D model. So if I'm not mistaken, he made a very fantastic sculpt, and basically like I don't want to spoil it because I mean I'm sure you're gonna love the content. So you can basically see the process of that explained in full detail of like, you know, splitting the model in parts, making keys, and finalize, so decimate every single part, sending the parts for 3D printing for resin production, generating the supports using like if I'm not mistaken the program of Formlabs, that now I don't remember the name, but yeah, so you can basically follow like that kind of tutorial if you want to learn more like the finalizing process behind the final optimizations, let's say, before printing, if you're gonna decide exactly basically to print like this model. Because what I'm gonna do in this workshop is gonna be to show you my process up to that point pretty much, and then I'm gonna show you also like in a final chapter. In the next chapter, I'm basically showing you like how to pose the model, and then like I'm gonna basically describe you like at the end how basically I've ended up like to 3D print like the model, but I'm not gonna show you each single step because pretty much all this part was already covered in very high detailed, so I cannot like, you know, add more content to what Martin already did. So I strongly suggest you to go and have a look, you know, to what Martin created. And also he has some fantastic organic sculpting tutorials of showing his process to make creatures, and very like Giger inspired and Beksinski inspired designs, because he has a very like personal and original way to approach his design work, and especially the fact that he's creating like concept art pretty much in ZBrush on the fly. So that is pretty remarkable in my opinion, because normally what, for example, the way that I most of the time I work is like I take like a 2D concept art, like in this case I show you how to convert a 2D concept art into 3D, but the way that you have to approach a 3D sculpt without any 2D information, let's say, or almost, it's like, I mean, okay, you can always refer to multiple references, so you can have, let's say, a board in pure ref with multiple, for sure, I'm pretty sure that also Martin, but any artist, I mean, use tons of references before to go and sculpt. But what I'm saying is, like, in his case, for example, what is very remarkable and unique is the fact that he's able to create his own ideas completely on the fly, you know, like without necessarily following specific and very precise to the concept art. So it maybe borrows like different ideas from different designs, but at the end of the day, it's creating something completely original, which is fantastic. So I strongly suggest to go and check his content out, and also to refer to that unique tutorial about keying, hollowing, using mesh mixer, using all these softwares, to finalize and to print the models. And so basically back to this was a kind of quite a kind of a large digression. Let's say that I took a bit the conversation a bit the description of the project a bit more further. I wanted to even introduce this concept at the end, and for sure I'm gonna repeat them in the next chapters. But here in the meantime, basically what happened here is like that I carry on to work on each single subtools, and using like very simple techniques. So in this case, for example, I'm using like simple brush like orb cracks to have a better definition, or to make some cuts, and to split, for example, subtools into different sections. Then I'm using like sometimes the move tool in combination with the H polish to have better angles if I have to adjust a bit like some contours or some of the silhouette of some parts. H polish I use it a lot, like really to clean up a lot the finishing of the surface, basically of a subtool. In this case, also I'm using combination a lot of clip brush as well to adjust once again the silhouette. Here, another thing that I found very important as well is keeping rotating the model, because sometimes you can spot things that after a while, when you work for quite some time on a subtool or on a part more complex, like in this case this weapon, this rifle, basically sci-fi rifle, what you have to do is like you have to try to see if there are ways that you can improve the design, or like refine the contour. Here, for example, I'm trying to make like a better edges, so I'm using like a trim dynamic. Sometimes you can also use like the lazy mouse, so you can turn on the lazy mouse and increase the lazy radius, because in this way you can trace much more precise and straight lines across the borders of your subtool. In this case, I'm not using, because I'm going like by small increment. I'm going very slowly and taking like in small incremental ways, let's say. And but yes, it's something that I'm trying to kind of to finalize the piece. Also adding like some standard brush on the borders. I'm testing out things, to see if I can, let's say, reinforce these edges. So I'm using like standard brush, and then I use a brush alpha, like a square, that is gonna give you like this kind of more, let's say, more defined border, in a way. So yeah, I'm testing out some things to see how the final model is gonna look like. Also because there is gonna be like some sort is gonna it's gonna kind of remind some shapes also of the character, adding this more defined borders, Also, don't forget that we are working with a miniature that is gonna be quite small. So roughly this weapon, it's gonna be like a bit smaller than the leg, So I would say probably about like maybe 1 centimeter, which is not too small, but not. I mean, it's not massive still, but it should show up like quite well. Also, like in the final pose, basically what I've done is I've decided basically to go for a double weapon. So the concept has also like one weapon. Only one weapon on his left hand, but I thought basically to add like a double weapon, so I thought that was kind of more interesting, more let's say a bit more aggressive, like the final result. to kind of remind a bit old old shooting game, like a real tournament. I don't know if anyone for sure. I mean, it's quite famous, but I've been playing quite a lot in the past, back in the days, many years ago. And yeah, so like back to the sculpting. So here I'm keeping like refining these parts, using like a bit of like smooth, and together I'm adding also like a edge polish. You can use it also like with the alt. If you press alt, you can use it in a inverted way. So you can, for example, add a bit of volumes. If you see that, for example, there is a sort of a cavity inside the part, or an indent, so you can use that to readjust some shapes basically, and to make sure that everything is nice and flat. And here I'm adding like this sort of primitives. I mean, it's a sort of let's say a cylinder, but more stretched in the middle, and this is one of those shapes that you can import. Is an insert multi-mesh that you can import basically using the combination, the hotkeys like B for brush, I for insert, and then you can press, if I'm not mistaken, T, that is gonna open some sort of primitive shapes like cubes, spheres, open cylinders, closed cylinders, and also this kind of more extruded type of cylinders. That they are kind of a mix between a cylinder and a square, like stretched basically, but with the borders more like circular. So yeah, here I use like a boolean. That is something that I could show you like even before, but as you can see, I obtained like the final mesh. So it's very simple, the process. So you can create these three shapes, for example, and then you can add them. You can create a tool that goes underneath in the subtool stack. Is a tool that goes underneath the main tool that you want to remove the material. And then basically you can just select it in subtractive mode, clicking basically the second circle from the left in the subtool stack, and then you can create a boolean, and this automatically is gonna remove, the material from the main tool, which is basically this section next to where there is the fire, the fire part. And the tubes in the frontal part. So yeah, here I'm adjusting some proportions. So I'm swapping also into different materials. Especially the outline fin is extremely helpful when you do character design in general, or weapons. Especially weapons, because they are very based on silhouette. Is extremely important, especially in miniatures, that you make sure that your silhouettes are working well, and because they are so thin that and so small, the miniatures, that if there is not a nice silhouette in general, there's gonna be kind of let's say, or a boring design, or a bit of a awkward final result for sure. So it's something that I try to always double check, especially during the design course. It's something also that you don't need necessarily to all the time to have the silhouette on, because also you have this small canvas on the top left corner of the canvas. You have like this small window where you can always see in real time your silhouette when you are working. Also, there is the cool thing is like that if you press, I think, Control and you click and drag, or Shift, now I don't remember, but you can basically scale this window to be smaller or bigger depending on your needs in real time. So yeah, like this part now I'm using like the edge polish to refine this couple of tools that I've noticed there were few imperfections, and like here I'm also like I'm gonna use like the planar brush to remove like this line in the middle, so you can apply the same normal from the surface to the other part. So if there are, surface imperfections that are sticking out of that surface normal, basically, everything is gonna be trimmed at the same level. And here I'm adding like a couple of more tools. So I'm really approaching like at the end of the design here, making sure that the majority of the elements that I could see more or less like clearly from the concept, because of that of the position of the weapon, I'm trying to use those elements, because most of the time when you have like to make like a sort of this kind of characters for the weapons especially, you're gonna have like to most of the time they're gonna basically send you like some sketches with like the proper side view orthographic of the weapon, so things are slightly easier in that case, because you don't have like let's say to do much guesswork, but it's gonna be more about more of a precision type of work that you have to do to match that specific design. But yeah, I'm quite happy like with the way that this conversion in 3D of the concept of the weapon went. And in the next chapter now we're gonna talk about the posing. I'm gonna show you that steps.